Welcome to the Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. Back before COVID, there was a time when I could go out to the theater, to a shop, to meetings with guild members or gatherings with friends, and it wasn't unusual for me to notice a garment worn by someone or on a mannequin in a store that had an interesting detail that I hadn't thought about before. Having the ability to take a pattern that already fits you, one you are familiar with, and add a detail like a sleeve treatment, or even add a sleeve, a collar, a pocket, whatever, it takes a bit of understanding how patterns work, but it isn't a very complicated process. Of course, it's important to always test a pattern. When you do major alterations or combine pattern elements or details. I am forever making test garments, especially since ultimately I'll be creating this new pattern combination in hand-woven fabric. I'm going to demonstrate two of these combinations of elements using my patterns, but the concept works for just about any pattern you might have. It is assumed that both patterns worked for you in their original form. Get each pattern to fit well before combining them. Let's start with this jacket. I finished this recently, and I actually talked about it in a previous video. The fabric wasn't wide enough to get a full back, so I moved the side seams, which I covered in that previous video. The pattern is my 100 jacket, and it has a nice roomy sleeve, patch pockets, and it has a V-shaped neckline, which is supposed to get a band or a shawl collar variation. I wanted this jacket to be warm and slouchy, something that I toss on to wear around the house, especially since I'm not leaving the house. And I thought a different neckline would be more appropriate. So I decided that not only would I use the neckline from my 800 vest, leaving off the collar, but I would extend the center front 3 inches so the center fronts could keep my chest warm when I cuddle up on the sofa to read the paper, but fall open into a mock lapel when I'm moving about the house. This summer top has sleeves, and I've had a lot of requests for this pattern, which is in fact a combination of my 1000 sleeveless swing dress and my 200 jacket armhole and sleeve. I'll demonstrate how to do both of these combinations. But first, I want to address the differences between my 100 jacket and my 200 jacket. If you look at the garments made from each of these patterns, they might appear the same, but there are 2 distinct differences. The 100 jacket actually has 2 different fronts, one with a bust dart and one without. It's a boxier jacket, and it can create a roomier look. The 200 jacket has a more fitted appearance, with not only bust darts, but front and back waist darts as well. The sleeves on these 2 jackets are quite different as well. The 100 jacket sleeve has a shorter cap and a deeper armhole. It has a roomier sleeve, and I definitely wanted this type of sleeve for my lounging jacket. The 200 jacket sleeve has a more tailored, higher cap and a shallower armhole, more typical of a fitted jacket. I chose this armhole and sleeve to add to the swing dress pattern for my summer top. For my lounging jacket, I traced the red size, which is a bit bigger than I would usually wear in this jacket. I do tend to like my things more fitted, but I wanted roomy and slouchy for this jacket. I started tracing the size red front of the 100 jacket. I made light marks indicating where the front seam line and cutting line are for reference for when I move the tracing to the 800 vest. Since these two jackets use the same fit model, it was easy to overlay the two, starting with the shoulders and noting where the side seams meet. So then I'd have the same basic size to work from. Here you can see the size red neckline underneath the tracing medium and the original 100 jacket neckline. Now, the 800 vest stops at the center front line, and because of the way the vest is constructed, there is no seam allowance added to the center front of the 800 vest. It's important to always know how a particular pattern is constructed before copying information from one to the other. Once I trace the 800 neckline onto the 100 jacket, then I'm going to add the additional 3 inches to the center front of each side of the jacket. I have covered the tracing of patterns extensively in a separate video. Please watch that because I talk about how to keep the gridded paper on grain, and that's going to be really important down the road when you go to cut out your garment. So adding this additional 3 inches to the center front allows me to overlap the fronts when I want it to be warm, but let the lapels fall back and the jacket fall open when I want it to be casual. I left off the hem here because I wanted to crochet around the entire jacket perimeter to make the jacket less constructed and fussy. To add a sleeve to a sleeveless garment is really quite simple, but you can't just stick any sleeve into any armhole. To make the pattern for the summer top here, I started with my 1000 swing dress. I needed to figure out how long to make the top, and that was just standing in front of the mirror with garments that I already had and liked or disliked and copying that length. It also depends how much fabric you have. That right there can decide how long your garment will be. Now, the center front seam on the swing dress swings out, as its name suggests. So you'll want to make that straight and possibly even placing the center front on the fold, unless of course your fabric isn't wide enough, and then go ahead and leave the seam allowance in. So first I'm going to trace the shoulder, the neckline, and the side seams, along with the bust dart and the waist dart. And because I want this top to be a little bit more fitted, I'm actually going to trace a size smaller, my size green, than I did for the previous demonstration. You'll notice that the waist dart tapers back in as it approaches the hemline. But the garment will look or hang better if the dart just continues straight down into the hem. So I'm giving this garment a 1.5-inch hem. So from the hemline to the lower edge of the garment, the darts will continue straight. Note the current position of the sleeveless armhole on the pattern that you are tracing. I like the sleeve shape of the 200 jacket. Remember, we talked about that earlier in the video. The 200 jacket sleeve has a slightly higher cap and a more tailored armhole. Here's the front of the 200 jacket. It has roughly the same footprint as the 1000 dress, so I overlay my tracing, lining up the sides, the fronts, shoulders, and darts. And if you're using a couple of different brands of patterns, the most important thing here is that you line up the shoulder and the side seam, because basically I'm tracing the armhole from one pattern and putting it into position in the other. You can see here the original cutting line for the armhole on the swing dress. By tracing the 200 jacket armhole onto the pattern for the top, I can be assured that the 200 jacket sleeve will fit the armhole. You can see here that the armhole that takes the sleeve is actually deeper than the sleeveless armhole, and it sits out much further on the shoulder. So all I have to do is trace the 200 sleeve, making it any length I want, and in this case, I want a short sleeve. Make sure when you add the sleeve hem, in this case 1.5 inches, that you fold it back to trace the shape of the wider upper arm. So the lower edge, when folded up, will span the sleeve circumference. The only other adjustment I have to make after repeating this process for the back is to alter the facing. The directions for the swing dress give a number of edge finishes for the neckline and the armhole, including a full facing that covers both areas. With a sleeve attached, there's no need for an armhole facing, so if a neck facing is desired, we need to trace that part off the 1000 dress front facing and then repeat that for the back. The facing depth is 2 inches, so by measuring down from the neck cutting line 2 inches and marking that measurement all along the lower edge, a front facing is created. So now we have a front facing, and this front neck edge can be placed on the fold as well, if desired. You're going to repeat this for the back facing. These two pieces, the front and back facing, will then be sewn together at the shoulders and attached to the garment in a normal facing application. There are lots of other ways to combine my patterns, or really anyone's patterns, and I'll cover other options in separate videos. Remember, always try the new combination in junky fabric first, an old sheet or a beach towel, just to make sure that you got it right and it fits you the way you intended. I'm Daryl Lancaster for The Weaver Sews.